All right. I've got to hit mine. Where's mine? Record. All right, man. Hey, I'm on. You're on. You ready to get
How's it
started?
going?
Good to see you. Well, got a fun topic today for sure. What is it?
Well, I think we're going to look at immigration and try to think a little bit theologically about this topic, which is kind of an important issue right now.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to be ahead. We are ahead of the curve because in just about a month from now, month and a half, there will be some woke church that will come and have a nativity scene with baby Jesus and Mary and Joseph in a cage, like they did every year, with a sign that says Jesus was an illegal immigrant. And that's kind of like the mic drop that typically, when you're trying to get into some sort of theological conversation, people will always say, well, hey, Jesus was an illegal immigrant. And there you go, man. And so take that. And I think the conversation is a little bit trickier than that, a little bit deeper. So I'm excited about looking at that and kind of thinking through that from the Old Testament side, and then letting you kind of bring in some of the New Testament on that. So going to be good, man. You going to pray us in and start this up?
Yeah, let's pray and go for it. So,
Okay.
join me in the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
I celebrate that last part, because I think it's good.
I like it, man. I do like it. I'm not going to discount the very last part. So, all right. Well, so let's talk about the immigration piece, because I think that most of the time, I think the loudest proponents of talking about immigration from a theological perspective typically kind of are there's a real push to say theologically borders don't matter, and that the free move from one country to a next is not really an issue. And so how do you think about it? And typically, like I said, when we talk about immigration, since it's a hot issue in our country, people always want to bring up, and they just say Jesus was an illegal immigrant. So how do you respond to that kind of a thing? So I think if we're going to do this, I think we need to look at, I think just a biblical understanding. I think two things, right? So let's deal with what does the Bible say about immigrants? And then let's deal with the understanding of borders and nations and sovereignty as it relates to immigrants in the Bible. So from an Old Testament perspective, right, we deal with it. I mean, you don't have to look far to find that, okay, obviously, we do see people like Abraham, and the patriarchs. They are called, resident aliens. They're wandering, and or they're sojourners, as you might see different words used for them. Resident aliens, that they would be living in a place that's not theirs, as God says about them in Egypt. Sojourners have used of kind of wandering in areas, throughout. The patriarchs would be the wanderers in the land and in and out. But okay, once you get into the legal code, right? You get the Bible's view of immigrants is one of protection, and one of that there is some dignity that's involved, even though they are not Israelites. So you'll find that there they'll say things like, like Exodus 23:9, you're not to oppress a resident alien. You yourselves know how it feels to be a resident alien, because you were resident aliens in the land of Egypt. So how I treat immigrants is important, right? Because God says you were once immigrants as you were in Egypt. So that's kind of the core piece there. Is just that how you are to regard them, how you are to treat them. And you'll find you're not allowed to oppress him. And that's going to be like Leviticus 19. And you'll see that things like in Leviticus 19:34, Right after he says you're not to oppress them in 34, he says you're to regard the alien who resides with you as the native born among you. You're to love him as you love yourself. So there's even a call to how you love them. And so I think the first piece is, at least from an Old Testament perspective, a good thing to keep in mind is, regardless how I deal with immigrants, is I have to come from a perspective of love, and I have to have equal treatment in terms of my personal relationships. I think the Bible does make a distinction about how governments and how officials will treat them, but on a personal level, in terms of their human dignity, in terms of relationships to them, there is a piece of they are to be treated as equals, as brothers, in the land. That's kind of the major point that Israel makes, that the law makes for Israel. So what do you think so far on that?
Yeah, I think that's important, especially because people need to hear us say that, because any type of conversation on this easily gets framed in terms of bigotry, racial motivations, politics. And the reality is that the Bible is very clear that we are to love the stranger, love the sojourner, love the one that is in the land. And part of the basis for Israel's view of love is their own experience, and that need to have people looking out for your welfare when you're unable to. And so we don't disagree with that, I think, at all. It's just a matter of how does that fit into a larger context of immigration, national sovereignty, borders, deportations, all of those types of things, because the Bible does say something about that as well. But regardless of your approach to those things, we are going to love all people as Christ called us to, love those that are even enemies, and we'll love our neighbor as ourselves. And so, I think that is really important. And unfortunately, that's the part that if we say anything that is not in the prevailing mindset of some, that will be forgotten and not counted as they relate what we're saying. But we can't say that enough, that we love those that have found themselves in our land.
And I would say just a good caveat to this is your, if I would say, obviously clear, the Old Testament law talks about how you're to treat them, right? And they put them in a category of like, you need to treat them differently than you, and understand like they're in a different class. They're not part of the culture. They're separate. And so you treat them like you would. They often throw them in with the orphans and the widows. Like the immigrant is somebody you're going to care for and you're going to take care of. I do think that should mean for you and I too, right? Like in terms of their dignity, regardless of whether they're here illegally or legally, dignity is due them in terms of my personal relationship. Now, that's not to say that there are rules about what a government should do, but I think in terms of how on a personal basis of individuals, I think the law is very clear how we are to treat and relate to individuals. And I think that just comes also from just being image bearers of the King. And so I think that's the first piece. That's the clearest thing of just personal relationships. You love the immigrant, and I think that's regardless of their status as well.
So, in agreement with that, what do we do then? Especially we're Arizona pastors, and border is important to Arizonans. I'm always I kind of laugh when I hear someone from Connecticut talk about how we need to be more compassionate and have more open borders, because it directly affects our communities where it's much less of an impact. There's not a lot of worry about Canadians coming down. And part of the reason is that we offer a better economy, a more stable government, and America is attractive to Latin America, South America, as a place where if you could get here, life likely will be better. And so because of that draw, we end up with a lot of immigrants, right? And many that are legal and many that are not legal, and some that are seeking asylum, right? And so, should Christians have a say? I mean, there's certain Christians I know that basically say we should have no voice in politics or government, and we should just be kind of separate from all of that, isolated from that. I don't come from that perspective, and that might be a whole nother discussion. Like, what is the connection between the Christian citizen and the government?
Yeah.
But if we are to have, if we're going to vote and if we're going to be working through these issues, how does a Christian think about this issue?
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about government, right? Let's talk about what we see in the Bible in terms of as it relates to immigration. What does it speak on that? One of the first things I think it's important to see is when you start to look at how we are to treat immigrants. That's one thing. The other piece that's quite fascinating is the way that immigrants are to obey the laws of the land, right? So that's a big thing when you read the Torah. One of the things that you'll see. So, for instance, this is one of the early pieces. You'll look and you'll say, like this will be. This is like Exodus 12. If an alien resides among you and wants to observe the Lord's Passover, every male in his household must be circumcised, then he may participate. He'll become like a native of the land. But no uncircumcised person may eat it. The same law will apply to both the native and the alien who resides among you. So there's certain things that just by the law of what was supposed to take place, who is allowed to participate in something, they are bound by that. You'll see the same thing in Leviticus 17. Anyone from the house of Israel or from the aliens who reside among you who eats any blood, I will turn against that person who eats blood and cut him off from the people. For the life of that creature is in the blood, and I've appointed it to you. So that's another one. Like you'll see, there's like understanding of you don't just get to live in the land and it's just pour out love on you all the time. But that there's a standard. So there's a legal standard that they must abide. It's by the rules of Israel and how Israel's supposed to act. And if they want to participate even in some places, they're going to have to do something beyond in order to be involved with certain pieces of it. So like one of the things you'll see Leviticus 24:22, you're to have the same law for both the resident alien and the native, because I am the Lord God. And so there's law that they are given. They're going to be held by the same standards that you and I are to be held like. I think that's greatly missing today in our society, as well as that we have laws for different classes of people and different groups. There's not necessarily equality anymore, but I think the Old Testament shows there is equality. And if you're going to enter into someone's land, you must obey those legal pieces, at least for Israel. So that's another little piece I think is important to consider, is that aspect of how they are to obey the laws that follow the land that is there. What are your thoughts on that? Anything on New Testament perspective that you see related to that?
Yeah, I think kind of related to that, obviously, Romans 13 comes to mind in terms of every Christian is to obey the rulers, that they're under. And most of the time that is it's demarcated by a boundary, so you have a ruler who has sovereignty over a certain jurisdiction, right? And if you're in that jurisdiction, then you need to follow that ruler, especially if they're not ruling in a way that is evil, but actually, upholding God's mandate that they lead according to the good. And so if you grew up kind of as a sojourner in some sense, right?
Yeah.
And you've lived in a nation, not America. And as a result, you've got to follow the laws of that land. And as a good Christian, we would do that here and wherever we might find ourselves.
Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, this is the non-biblical argument, is that most of the world runs on borders. I mean, growing up in another country, especially in an Islamic country, that is one of those things that, like, if you overstay your visa, you're tossed out. They find you, they take you, you're gone. You cross. Here's a fun one. You ever try to cross a border? Try even putting a foot across, like the Israeli border. You ain't gonna have a foot anymore, right? Because you don't just cross into like to borders of countries, right? This is one of the places where we have real issues and we struggle with our border and understanding that. But I guess this begs the question, right? Okay, so you have to think about like, okay, so the people have laws they need to abide by. There's certain qualifications. If they're going to do something, they need to be able to do this. If you're going to participate, especially in those are the religious laws. But for across the board, that the same laws apply to both the residents and um, aliens. But here's the other piece. I think there's kind of the narrative pieces that give us glimpses into the laws. And I think that's something that you'll see in the Old Testament, which is I don't think it's as free. When people say things like Jesus was an illegal immigrant, right? I don't think they quite grasp the historical context of what was happening. So, Old Testament world, for instance, you do have giant you do have lots of giant open places you can go back and forth. They don't have borders, so to speak. They had regions of territories that people were in control of. But every time you would enter into a specific region, especially back in those days, you're going to typically stay on the major trade routes, right? So like the King's Highway going from through the land of Israel and into Egypt, right? So you've got these kind of major inroads, and whoever's in control of those places are going to be the people that meet you and kind of check you out. So some of those things that you'll see, like in the Genesis narratives, you obviously see that, like, okay, Joseph like the patriarchs recognize, Abraham sees it, Isaac sees it. Like, if we're going to go into the land, people are going to know who we are, and they're going to do something to us because they're going to see us. Now, what ends up happening, right, is in all those cases, whether they've wandered into Philistia in the case of Abraham and the case of Isaac, or whether you've wandered into Egypt, all of those guys are met at some point by officials of the king, and then ultimately meet the king. And so when Abram and Sarai go into Egypt, it's Pharaoh's officials who take her and bring her back. And so they obviously are in control, and they interact with her. It's interesting when you think about the stories of Joseph as he goes into the land. He is there. And then when the brothers come, he knows their business. He's got his guys checking in on them and making sure that they are there for what they're supposed to be doing, and then sends them on their way. He controls their coming and going. Actually, if you come back, I'm never going to release you, that kind of a thing. It also is interesting at the very end of Genesis that Pharaoh makes it known, like, go tell your brothers and your family, we want you to come here, right? That's important. And then there's this interesting little exchange later on where Joseph tells his brothers to say the following, and you see that, what does he say? Right here at, I think it's 47, 48, where he tells them, like, I want you to tell Pharaoh that you guys are shepherds, right? So that you will then take the land of Goshen. And so, because they're shepherding is seen as detestable, go ahead, go hang out in that area, right? And so those are things that you kind of see, as well as he controls where they settle. He controls what region they're supposed to go to. And so he gives them permission. That's in 47, and tells them, hey, the land is yours, and go for it. So I think those are things that we've got to keep in mind, at least from an Old Testament perspective. And 46, at the very end of 46, is where he says, tell them that you guys are shepherds, because then you'll get in Goshen. But he's in control of it. They don't just get to wander in and do what they want to do. He controls where they're going to be and where they're going to live. And that's kind of very much the way that goes. When you see the way later on with the empires coming, and I'll stop in just a sec, you fast forward to what are when the conquest happens, there's towns that, they have to abide by Israel's rules if they're going to stay in. When the Assyrians come in and take over, they are going to move their displaced peoples there, but they're subservient to the king of Assyria. And so there's rules. You don't just get to wander in. You don't just get to stay and wander around the empire. No, you're told where you're going to live and how you're going to live. You're given permission when you can move, even within the empire, right? They don't just get to wander back because they say, hey, we belong to we're people who are captives in Babylon. You wait until you're allowed to get permission. That doesn't come until the Persian time frame. So I think it's a lot trickier, a lot murkier. The freedom to move is not, I think, as easy as people think. There's a lot of permission, I think, that's involved with people moving in and settling into areas. And then what also goes with the Old Testament pieces, tribal allotments, that has to come. You don't just get to come into any area. Like that stuff is already all marked off in territory. And I will say this last piece, Deuteronomy is quite interesting too, because God even says, you're not going to take these areas. That belongs to the Ammonites. That belongs to the Edomites. That belongs to the Moabites. Like I've given these regions, right? And so wandering into places, doing what you want to do, that's off limits, even for the people of God, because he has already determined this region belongs to these people. It's for them. So I see that this stuff taking place where there seems to be borders. There seems to be an understanding that you don't mess with people in their land and they have kind of the control over everything.
Yeah, I mean, that's, you covered a lot of ground, and I don't disagree with any of that. Coming on that issue of borders, one of the passages I had was from Acts 17, and Paul is giving his Mars Hill speech, and he's at the Areopagus, and he's saying, God who made the world and everything in it, this is Acts 17, verse 24, since he is Lord of heaven and earth, does not dwell in temples made with hands, nor is he worshipped with men's hands as though he needed anything, since he gives to all life, breath, and all things. And this is the key part. Verse 26, he has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and boundaries of their dwelling. And the goal is that they would worship him and all that. But Paul's making a case for God out of the unknown God to the Greeks. And one of the things that he is saying, we have a shared assumption here that God has made from one person, one blood, all of the nations. And as a result of that, we have this idea that boundaries are essentially given by God. And that doesn't mean that they don't change or they don't adjust, but boundaries aren't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, they're very much a good thing, and they show God's hand in the moving and the creating of nations. And it goes back to Babel, right? Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth. And they chose to make a name for themselves, right? And so God disperses the people, and he then, even if we go into Deuteronomy, the Song of Moses, it sounds like he even placed angelic emissaries over certain allotments of land and peoples, reserving Israel for his own name. So boundaries are a definite biblical thing, and they are a good thing, and they work against, in some degree, globalism, which the Bible kind of presents as a negative, as something that would actually accelerate human decay. And so that doesn't mean that just because someone's from a different nation, they're worse or better than us. What it means is that nations essentially are good. And how do you have a nation without a border or a boundary to say this demarcates our nation?
So let me ask you this, though. Let's talk about a New Testament perspective, though. Okay, so the idea that Jesus can just wander into Egypt, did he do that illegally from a New Testament perspective?
Yeah, it's kind of silly, really, because we don't get the whole story. We know he is fleeing from Herod. So you might say he's an asylum seeker, except he never left his nation because he's under the Roman Empire. Yeah. And so, there is no nation of Egypt anymore. There is the Roman Empire that controls Egypt. Interestingly enough, they stayed in the Roman Empire. That battle had been fought under Caesar, and Antony and Cleopatra, were defeated, and Egypt was under the control of Rome. He goes from one local magistrate, Herod, and under the same overarching empire of Rome, moves to a different ruler, his territory. And you
Yeah.
assume that that wasn't done where no one in Egypt knew they were there. They likely had to, like you said, interact with the people that were there and figured out they were coming from Bethlehem because, oh my goodness, Rome wanted to know who was there and where they were from and how much they should owe in taxes, right? So we were just doing a census to get an idea of who we have. And so the fact that they go to Egypt after they had honored the decree to go to Bethlehem just means that they fled because Herod is an insane person and they may have sought asylum, but they really didn't need to because they just had to get out of the state, more or less.
So I guess in that regard, it'd be like in some regards, traveling from one state to another in America. You're moving from, Arizona to California temporarily. Each one has different kind of rules depending on who their leader is, the main guy that Rome's placed there. And it could be easy or not. I mean, even Paul found that there were different places where it was going to be easier for him or not within the blanket of the Roman Empire, though. Okay, but let me ask you this about citizenship, though. Biblically speaking, on the New Testament side, that's where you do see that citizenship matters, and it's something that's not actually looked down upon. It's seen as a legitimate and a good thing to use to your advantage. So what do you see on that perspective?
Well, I think, when you look at status of people in the New Testament, and this isn't necessarily saying the New Testament wants it this way, but the assumptions they're working with are a state that has citizenship for Roman citizens, either by birth or by purchase, and you are a higher level of an individual in that society. Then you have regular folks that live there that don't have citizenship, and that's okay. So in fact, the vast majority of the Roman Empire was filled with non-citizens. You could just imagine that all of the conquered lands are, green card holders in some sense. They're allowed to work and dwell, but they're not making any political impact on the system. They're not voting for Senate, and they can be crucified where the citizens can't be, right? There's certain advantages to being a citizen. The other thing is that you have slaves. You have a whole class of sub-citizen, sub-freemen and slavery. And as a result of this, you have biblical writers working out a theology of dignity in the midst of all of these things, and really, kind of suppressing slavery as much as possible. If you can get free, go ahead and get free. And if you have slaves, you got to be really careful what you're doing there, and you better recognize you're God's slave. So however you treat those is going to come back to you. So all that stuff's kind of all muddled together, and sometimes we don't recognize that looking at the New Testament situation. But part of the reason that they can have more fluid borders between Roman territories is because entering the country doesn't make you a citizen, and having children in the country doesn't make you a citizen. And America didn't used to be like that, but some things were changed as a result of the Civil War and trying to make sure that citizenship was passed on to the African-American slaves who had been denied citizenship through the states. And so they kind of made an adjustment on how that's factored in. And one of the negative aspects that perhaps could be negative is this idea that if you're just born on this soil, you're a citizen of this country. So solving one problem created another, where people recognized all over the world that we've got a strange policy where if anyone can get across the border and have a child here, that child is guaranteed citizenship and all the rights.
Which didn't work like that in any other parts typically.
And that's something that maybe we need to rethink. But part of the reason we did that was to ensure that the southern states that had promoted slavery could not deny citizenship. And so one of the amendments addressed that. And again, I think that was for a greater good, but we're dealing with some of the unexpected aspects of that, because at the time we weren't worried about Haitians coming across the border, in large migrant, thousands of people at once. That's a whole different mindset that wasn't the target at the time. So the Bible sees that world, and, that doesn't necessarily mean America must do it this way or that way. Again, our attitude is that of love. And yet borders are biblical, but borders are divine in some sense, and maintaining borders is okay. One of the words that I think you were alluding to with Joseph is, the word sojourner is a word that's used of someone who comes knowingly into someone else's border. There's also the word they use, spies. And
Yeah.
Moses sends spies into Jericho, and so does Joshua. And Joseph accuses his brothers who have come knowingly into the country of being spies. And the Hebrew word, I think, is regal. It's to foot around. It's kind of sneaking around, and that you might be coming in with not the best intentions. And so you weren't necessarily welcome. And the Bible never says, welcome the spy among you, And so that's an interesting extra piece to that, because we love sojourners, but if there are nefarious people that come across the border seeking to undermine the government or to not follow its laws, they wouldn't be viewed as sojourners in that sense. And so
and the governments, from all that we can see, had every right in the text. Every government in the text has that right. And so that's not like there's no comment that this is wrong either. That's part of their job as being the government, is protecting that and being able to deal with that, to protect their citizens and to protect their sovereignty as well.
What's that story where they ask him to pronounce the word in a certain way?
The shibboleth, that's in Judges with Gideon. Is that with Gideon? Man, now you got me. Now I'm saying it off the top
I didn't know,
of my head.
so there's no shame.
It's not with Gideon. I know what it is now. I know it's with Jephthah. That's Judges 12. So that's how they're able to tell the difference between the people and they live in the land. The shibboleth versus the sibboleth. And of course, so that's Judges 12.
Is that instructional to this conversation, you think?
It's just dealing with regions, though, of like what people sound like and things like that, how they were able to tell the difference between people like who were coming in from the area.
In a hostile environment, they were using that test to kill the enemy, right?
Yeah, exactly. That is an interesting one. My mind immediately goes to, especially like on the New Testament side, is Paul didn't seem to think that having a citizenship was a bad thing. In fact, he used that to his advantage as well, right? You see that taking place in the New Testament. They don't see something as like, he doesn't renounce it. He doesn't say, no, for the sake of everybody else here who doesn't have it, I will not. No, like when he's got it, he plays that card and uses the benefits that come with the fact that he's got it.
Yeah, and there's the instance where he actually allows himself to be beaten before revealing that, to bring shame to the local government so that he can have the ultimate vindication, where they march him out, kind of in repentance for what they had done, because they beat a Roman citizen without knowledge. And so, all that stuff kind of comes into play. As far as a Christian thinking politically and what we should do and all these things, there's nothing wrong with protecting borders, knowing who is coming in, so that we can know that they're following the laws. And I think assimilation is a big piece that we may not have time. We might come back at this another time, but the reason they're to drive out the inhabitants of the land is so that they don't assimilate with the Canaanites.
You don't pick up their practices
in large numbers. Without assimilation, the culture of God could be declined. And so you could extend that to what is a nation without its own culture. And so should there be a limit to the number of immigrants at any given time? And
I think that was primarily religious. And obviously you don't want, the Canaanites are a bunch of, child sacrificing witches that you see. And, after doing some of the Judges, the stuff in Genesis and some of the stuff in Joshua, you're like, hey, there's some giants there too. And there's some weird stuff that's in there too. So, there's that piece of like, don't pick up their practices, because there's definitely some stuff. But I do think, like a lot of the law too is reconditioning them of like, you did a lot of weird stuff in Egypt, but we're not doing that when we go into the land as well. But I do think, I think that's important. I think, like Joseph, you spend your time, he learns his language. In fact, his brothers don't even know that he is of that. I think you see that too in terms of assimilation, in terms of how the names of Israelites shift once they're into the exile as well. You'll see things that seem to be implying that they've taken on more, a different type of name, not so much the Israelite, but they've got sort of maybe a kind of a Persian spin a little bit too, right? So Esther, Mordecai, things like that. Like those seem to indicate a little bit of like, we understand we're here. We're here, and this is kind of the names of the land too, and we'll go with that.
I think one last aspect, again, we may come back at this at a different time, but walls, cities and walls, and blessed is Israel and its walls.
They're bad because Jericho had them and we blew the walls down.
And then Nehemiah prayed and God blessed him so he could go rebuild the wall. And again, these were
my argument, man.
City walls form protection, but it also helped ensure that certain people didn't come in that weren't supposed to come in. And again, when Israel snuck spies into Jericho, they were spies because they were not supposed to be there. They weren't sojourning in Jericho at that moment, right? And so Jericho would have been within their rights to execute the spies. And they did succeed in driving them out just by looking for them. So those are some things too that we could play into this, because nations seem to be permitted, at least Israel was permitted, to protect its borders through human resources or through physical barricades. And that was very common in antiquity. So even though we do have kind of a open sojourning policy, and you're shepherds, we're shepherds, share some land and do these types of things, this is okay. But we want to know who you are. We want to know that you're not going to violate our laws, or else you're going to get removed. And then again, in our larger cities where it gets harder to track some of this, we're going to have protective barricades in place to make sure that we can really monitor who's coming in and out. And you extend that to today's world, and you've got larger, it's not just cities, but it's whole nations, whole states. And so it's not an unbiblical mindset to extend what made good sense at that time to a larger structure. But you can't say that again without always emphasizing we love those that are in our land. We're trying to win them to Christ. We're trying to meet needs and take care. At the same time, it's not unbiblical to think through those other issues. And,
exactly.
And even support policies that might help with regard to knowing who's here, ensuring that they're following the law, and then having a good process to bring people in a way that's safe.
I guess what could be said is, like what we said, is there's the personal piece that all of us have an obligation to how we treat others. Right. That's key. The other side of that too, I guess, to say the point we're trying to make is like the Bible has not given us a manual for like how the country needs to be set up, what kind of border laws they're going to have. Like that's not there. What I do think we should say is I think there's room for a discussion to say, here's what the Bible has, commented on or shown us. And I do think that can inform you in terms of, preference or where you land on some of that. And so I would just say that, like, if we saw things that would show us that these were wrong and that they were bad and they were talked about in a bad way, then I think that would be something we would want to keep in mind as we talk about this. But I do think there's room for disagreement between Christians of like how the nation should be set up and run. I do think that there's I think all the kind of wealth that we see from the Bible, it's not meaning to tell us and teach us about how to run the country, how to run the borders, all that kind of a thing. Though to some extent, there's a little bit of that in the Old Testament law for Israel and the land. But I do think it's good for, how do I think about this? Is it okay? Is it okay to have a position that says, yes, I think there should be borders? I think so, because I think there's no comment on that says it's not. Right. In fact, that seems to be the norm in the Bible. So I just want that to be clear, too, is I think if you want to be an open borders guy, God bless you. But I totally disagree with you, because I don't see really that has ever worked, or even that in the Bible as well. And I don't think that argument fits. I think biblically speaking, it's pretty closed in terms of borders, or at least control. There's always control. There's always somebody who knows who's coming in and who's coming out in areas. Even Abraham had to do that. You would go in certain places, and there were areas, like even when he wants a cave, right? He didn't just go to get to bury his wife in the cave. You got to ask for permission, find a way, get in the field. He's going to buy it from these people who are in charge of this area. So yeah, I think that's just what we got to realize is the one thing we're for sure of is how we treat, how we talk. The other is that's just, you want to build a policy. What do you think is good policy? Well, here's what I think that at least the Bible shows us is strong policy.
Yeah, I think I'm in agreement, and I think it's an important thing because it's worth talking about, and it can be done in a loving way. And again, you know, we do need government to look out for the welfare of the people. And one of the ways that an issue that must be addressed is immigration. And so Christians can have thoughts on this. And the Bible gives us good illumination in a lot of ways. So it's not a clear-cut thing, like you said, because God's not establishing a church nation. He's establishing a people that is an open borders body in that it transcends culture, it transcends nations. We are Christians. But it's interesting that he will identify where those Christians are coming from at the end as every tribe, nation, and tongue. And so that's an interesting piece too. But yeah, I think that's good.
I guess one last thing about that you bring onto that is just the gospel piece of this, right? Is even in the Old Testament laws, like there is an understanding that there will be Gentiles who will want to participate and to join the faith, right? And I do think that we lose this discussion in the immigration debate, which is, whatever that is happening there, my personal conviction needs to be still for evangelism. I need to be continuing to love people the way Jesus told me to, and I need to be understanding that, like, God may save these people, the immigrants that he's placing around me, right? So say what you want about what's happening with the Afghani immigration issue as well, coming in. The governments are making that choice. I can have my perspective of it, but once I'm here and they're with me, and the immigrants that are in your school system that have been brought in from all over, the Iraqis, the Sudanese, the Somali, that are all around you, they're here. And so you can debate all you want, have all, get as frustrated as you want about how policy that brought them there. But I think more importantly, like you and I need to be looking, say, my hope and my prayer would be that as they are now in our land, that they would want to join and they would want to begin to participate in this, and that something about the way I share with them and love with them will draw them in to that as well. And so we do, I think that's just something else to keep in mind, is like let the gospel be something that's in the forefront when you think about immigration, for those who are here already too. I think that's key to keep in mind, even though we have a big political issue we have to debate as well.
Good. Go. Well said.
Well said. Here. All right, man. Let's do the prayer as we close, and then let's be done, man. Well, that's another one for the can, another one in the tank. Here we go. May the Lord bless you and protect you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord look with favor on you and give you peace. Guys, God bless. Thanks for watching. We will talk to you later. Bye-bye, man. See ya.
Take care. Have a good one.